I never used to believe in ghosts. Not really. I'd watched the movies, heard the stories people told around campfires, but I always figured there was a rational explanation for everything. Then I started this channel. Then I started digging into the places people are afraid to talk about. And now, sitting here in my apartment with every light on at 2 in the morning, I'm not so sure anymore. Welcome back.
If you're new here, this is where I share the stories that keep me up at night. The ones I can't shake. And as we move deeper into this Halloween season, as the air gets colder and the nights stretch longer, I want to tell you about 3 encounters that changed the way I see the world. These aren't jump scares, these aren't special effects. These are the real things, the dark things, the things that live in the spaces between what we know and what we're afraid to admit might be true. So do me a favor, dim the lights, lock your doors, maybe grab something to drink because your mouth is going to go dry. I'm about to tell you 3 stories, and I need you to understand something before we start. I've been to these places, I've talked to the people who survived, I've held the evidence in my hands, and I'm still not okay. Are you ready? Because once you hear this, you can't unhear it. Let's begin. The first place I want to take you is somewhere I went last autumn, northern England. The moors stretch out there like an ocean of dead grass and grey stone, and tucked into one of those valleys, hours from anything you'd call civilization, there's a building called Blackwood Manor. I'd heard about it for years. Every paranormal forum, every late-night Reddit thread about the most haunted places in the UK, someone would mention Blackwood. But it wasn't until I was actually driving up that narrow dirt road, watching the manor appear through the fog like a rotting tooth, that I understood why people were so afraid of it. The locals won't go near it. I'm talking about people who've lived in that region their whole lives, people whose families have been there for generations. When I stopped at a pub to ask for directions, the bartender looked at me like I'd just signed my own death warrant. He told me the taxi drivers refuse fares to Blackwood after dark. He told me about hikers who accidentally get too close and feel the temperature drop so fast they can see their breath, even in summer. He told me about the dread that settles over you when you're near those walls. Not fear, exactly. Dread, like your body knows something your brain hasn't figured out yet. I went anyway, that's the job, right? That's what you're here for. The manor was built in the 1800s by the Ashworth family, old money, the kind of wealthy that comes with power, with influence, with the ability to make problems disappear. I'd done my research. I'd read the old newspaper clippings in the local library archives, the ones printed on paper so thin it nearly crumbled in my hands. The Ashworths were described as untouchable, respected, feared. But behind the grand facade, behind those tall windows and stone columns, something terrible was happening. Something that left a stain so deep it soaked into the bones of that building. It starts in 1888, October. A young woman named Ilara Ashworth vanished one night without a trace. I've seen her photograph. It's hanging in the town hall, part of a historical display nobody looks at anymore. She had dark hair, pale skin, eyes that seemed sad even in the portrait. She was 22 years old. The family searched for weeks. They combed every inch of that sprawling estate, called in search parties, offered rewards, but all they ever found was a single shoe, satin, caked in mud, discovered near the edge of the property where the land turns into bog, thick, black, treacherous bog that swallows anything that steps into it. The official story was an accident. She'd lost her way in the dark, they said. She'd wandered into the bog and drowned. Tragic, but simple. The local constable closed the case in less than a week. But I talked to the descendants of the people who worked at that manor. I sat in their living rooms and listened to the stories that never made it into any newspaper. And they told me a different version. They told me about Elara's forbidden love for a stable hand named Thomas, a young man with kind eyes and no money to his name, no title, nothing the Ashworth family would have considered acceptable. They told me about secret meetings in the garden after midnight, about love letters hidden in the stables, about a father who discovered the affair and lost his mind with rage. Some of them say he locked her away, locked her in a forgotten wing of the mansion, and left her there to waste away in the darkness. They say you could hear her screaming, but the walls were too thick for anyone outside to help. Others say he chased her into the bog himself that October night. Say his anger was so consuming, so absolute, that he stood there and watched as the murky water pulled her under. Watched her pale hands reach up desperately for the surface one last time before vanishing forever. And Thomas, the stable hand, he disappeared the same week. Nobody ever saw him again. No body. No goodbye, just gone. Now here's where it gets worse. For decades after Elara vanished, the people who lived in that house, the servants who cleaned those rooms, they reported hearing sounds coming from inside the walls of the master bedroom. Scratching sounds, faint and desperate, like fingernails dragging across stone. And beneath that, the soft weeping of a young woman. Maids would quit without notice, pack their things in the middle of the night, and leave without even collecting their final wages. They wouldn't explain why. They couldn't. Groundskeepers claimed to see candlelight flickering in the windows of the abandoned East Wing, even though there was no electricity in that part of the building. No source for the light. Just that pale, wavering glow moving from room to room in the dead hours before dawn. When I was there, standing in what used to be the main hall, I felt it. That dread the bartender had warned me about. The air was wrong. Too still. Too cold. My breath came out in clouds, even though it was only October and not particularly cold outside. I had my camera, my audio recorder, all the gear I usually bring. But I'm telling you, the second I stepped through that doorway, every piece of equipment started acting strange. The camera wouldn't focus. The audio picked up static that sounded almost like whispering. And my phone, fully charged when I arrived, was dead within 20 minutes. The most terrifying accounts come from the people who tried to stay overnight. I interviewed a woman whose uncle was part of a paranormal investigation team back in the 1970s. They were professionals, she told me. They had expensive equipment, years of experience, a reputation for staying calm under pressure. They fled Blackwood Manor in the middle of the night, left behind thousands of dollars worth of gear in their panic. In their official report, which I managed to get a copy of, they described how all their instruments malfunctioned simultaneously as a figure appeared at the end of a corridor. A woman in a tattered white dress, her face hidden in shadow. Her movements were wrong, jerky, unnatural, like she was being pulled along by invisible strings. She raised one arm slowly, painfully, and pointed a long, pale finger directly at them. The lead investigator said he heard her whisper one word, just one. Father. He never worked in paranormal investigation again, quit the field entirely. When the woman's niece asked him about it years later, he refused to talk. Just shook his head and walked out of the room. I only stayed at Blackwood for 3 hours. That's all I could handle. As I was leaving, as I was walking back to my car, in the fading afternoon light, I heard it. That scratching sound, coming from somewhere inside the walls, faint but unmistakable. I didn't go back to check. I got in my car and I drove. The manor stands abandoned now, its windows shattered, its roof caving in, a monument to a secret that was never properly buried. Local children still dare each other to touch the front gate, but nobody goes further. Some boundaries, I learned that day, are not meant to be crossed, Now let me take you somewhere completely different. Somewhere I went 6 months ago that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. New York City. Beneath the streets, beneath the subways you ride every day, there are other tunnels. Older ones, forgotten ones. Places the city doesn't acknowledge anymore because acknowledging them would mean admitting what lives down there. I met a guy named David through a mutual contact. He's in his 40s now, works in finance, lives in a nice apartment in Brooklyn. You'd never guess what he went through, but when he agreed to talk to me, when we sat down in a quiet coffee shop and he started telling me his story, I watched his hands tremble around his cup. I watched the color drain from his face. This happened to him in the late 1990s when he was in college. He and 3 friends decided to explore the legendary Mole People tunnels. You've probably heard the rumors. Stories about communities living in the darkness beneath the city, people who rejected the world above and built their own society in the abandoned stations and maintenance corridors. Urban legends spread through dorm rooms and late-night conversations at bars. David and his friends wanted an adventure. They wanted a story to tell. They found something they've spent the last 25 years trying to forget. They went down through a maintenance hatch near an abandoned station on the Lower East Side. David described it to me in detail. The metal ladder bolted into concrete, the way the light from the street disappeared as they descended, the moment when they dropped into complete darkness and had to switch on their flashlights. The air down there was cold, stagnant. It smelled like rust and decay, and something else David couldn't quite name. Something organic and wrong. The only sounds at first were their own nervous laughter and the constant drip, drip, drip of water echoing off the curved tunnel walls. Their flashlight beams cut through the darkness, revealing old graffiti from decades ago, the skeletal remains of what might have once been a homeless encampment, twisted rebar jutting from the concrete like broken bones. David said they felt brave, invincible. They were kids having an adventure. That confidence lasted about an hour. Then they heard it. A clicking sound, strange and guttural, coming from deeper in the tunnel system. It wasn't rhythmic. It was erratic, organic. David described it as teeth chattering but amplified, distorted, like it was being played through broken speakers. They convinced themselves it was rats, or the old structure settling. They kept going. That was their first mistake. The clicking grew louder, closer, and then beneath it, woven into it, came a low, rhythmic chanting. David stopped talking here. He stared at his coffee for a long time before he could continue. He told me the chanting wasn't human, wasn't animal either. It was something else, something primal, that had made its home in the forgotten spaces beneath our feet. The words, if they were words, sounded wrong. They seemed to come from everywhere at once, bouncing off the walls, growing in intensity until the air itself vibrated with sound. That's when they panicked. That's when they turned and ran. But in their terror, in their blind, scrambling rush back toward the entrance, one of them tripped. His name was Mike. He caught his foot on a piece of twisted rebar and went down hard. His flashlight shattered on impact. David said the darkness swallowed Mike instantly, completely. 1 second he was there, the next there was just blackness and the sound of Mike screaming. They heard fabric tearing, heard Mike's voice rise to a pitch David described as pure animal fear. And then silence. A silence so complete it felt like the darkness had physical weight. The remaining 3 ran. David said they crashed into walls, scraped their hands raw on concrete, but they didn't stop. They didn't look back. The clicking sound chased them, joined now by inhuman shrieks that didn't sound like they came from any throat David could imagine. They barely made it to the surface. They emerged through a different exit miles from where they'd entered, covered in grime and blood and shaking so hard they could barely stand. They went to the police. The detective who took their statement dismissed it as a drug-induced hallucination. Street kids playing in dangerous places, he said, probably high on something. Mike was listed as another missing person, just another name in a city of millions. But David knows what happened. He knows something lives down there, something that has learned to mimic human sounds, to lure people closer, something ancient and patient and hungry. 2 of David's friends moved out of New York within a year. The third still lives here, but he never takes the subway.
Never. He walks everywhere, no matter the distance, no matter the weather, because he knows what's waiting in the dark. When I asked David why he agreed to talk to me, why he was willing to relive this, he said he needed people to know. He needed someone to believe him. Before we said goodbye, he grabbed my wrist. His grip was tight. He looked me in the eye and said, "Don't go down there. Don't ever go down there. Some things should stay lost." I believed him. I still believe him.
Now for the last story. This one I didn't witness myself. I can't. The place doesn't exist on any map I can find. But I've held the evidence in my hands. I've read the journal. And I need to tell you what was written in it, because it's the kind of thing that changes you just knowing it exists. In 2004, a fisherman off the coast of Japan pulled something up in his nets, a bottle, old glass, sealed with wax. Inside was a journal, waterlogged, the pages swollen and stained, but still legible. It belonged to a man named Kenji Tanaka, a biologist who was part of a small, unsanctioned research expedition to an unnamed island. The kind of place locals call cursed, the kind of place fishermen avoid because ships that go near it don't come back. I managed to get copies of the journal entries through a contact at a university in Tokyo. Reading them felt like watching someone descend into madness in real time. The first entries are filled with wonder. Kenji describes flora and fauna unlike anything in the scientific record. Plants that mimic the sound of human speech to lure insects into their digestive chambers. Birds with eyes that seem too intelligent, too aware, watching the research team constantly and tilting their heads in a way that suggested calculation rather than instinct. He wrote that the forest felt wrong. The trees grew in patterns that defied natural growth. Everything felt staged, he said, deliberate, like the island itself was performing for them. Then his colleagues started disappearing. First, the navigator, a man named Hiro, vanished from his tent in the middle of the night. The others woke to find his sleeping bag empty, his boots still neatly placed by the entrance. But the tent had been torn open, not cut, torn, like something massive had simply plucked him out into the darkness. No blood, no signs of struggle, just the tear and silence. 2 days later they found the geologist at the bottom of a ravine. Her body was wrong, limbs bent at impossible angles. Her face was frozen in an expression Kenji described as absolute horror, eyes wide open, staring at something the living couldn't see. That's when Kenji realized they were being hunted. The final entries are frantic. The handwriting deteriorates into barely legible scribbles, ink smeared by shaking hands or water, or both. Kenji describes the creatures as shadows that walk, impossibly fast, silent. They moved through the jungle like ghosts. They didn't leave tracks, they didn't make sounds you'd associate with animals. They were something else entirely. Kenji wrote that they seemed to feed not on flesh but on fear itself. He describes waking to find another colleague missing, then hearing that colleague's voice calling to him from the darkness, begging him to follow, to come help. But when he looked closer, he saw shapes in the trees, shapes that didn't match the voices they were using. The island had learned their voices. It was using them as bait. The last entry is almost impossible to read. The letters barely form words. Kenji wrote, "I can hear them outside my tent. They are whispering my name. The plants learned it from us. They've been listening this whole time. The whispers are getting closer. I understand now."
I am not facing an animal. I am not facing a creature. I am facing the island itself. It's alive and it's hungry. Don't look for this place. Burn this journal if you find it. Pray you never find it. Pray it never finds you. The journal ends there. The final page is stained with something dark. Maybe water. Maybe not.
No rescue mission was ever launched because officially Kenji Tanaka and his team never existed. Their expedition was off the books. Their families were told there had been a boating accident near the mainland. Clean, simple, final. The island keeps its secrets, and somewhere out there in waters that don't appear on maps, it waits, still hungry, still listening. And there you have it. 3 places I can't forget. 3 encounters that changed the way I see the world. From Blackwood Manor, where Ilara still scratches at the walls in search of justice or vengeance or maybe just recognition that she existed, to the tunnels beneath New York where something ancient lurks in the forgotten spaces, to an island that knows your name before you ever speak it. These stories live in me now. They've taken up permanent residence in the back of my mind. Sometimes I wake up at 3 in the morning and I think about that scratching sound at Blackwood. I think about David's hands shaking around his coffee cup. I think about Kenji's final words. The world is full of shadows. I know that now. And sometimes those shadows stare back. Sometimes they follow you home. Sometimes they wait in the places we've forgotten, patient and hungry and eternal. I think about the things we don't put on maps. The places we avoid without fully understanding why. The sounds we explain away because the alternative is too terrible to accept. What do you think? Am I chasing legends, or have I stumbled into truths we're not supposed to know? Let me know your stories in the comments.
If you've been somewhere that changed you, somewhere that scared you in a way you can't explain, tell me. Maybe we can figure this out together, or maybe we'll just keep each other company in the dark. If you made it this far, if you're still here with me, hit that thumbs up. Subscribe if you want more of these stories. I've got plenty more. Too many, honestly. Places I've been.
People I've talked to, evidence that keeps me up at night. Stay safe out there, stay curious, and whatever you do, don't listen to the whispers in the dark. Because here's the thing I've learned, the thing that scares me most. They might just answer back. And when they do, they might know your name. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Maybe.